Hello, Teens Run. Happy Wednesday. This is Coach Kayla back for our lunch club lesson for the week. And this week we are going to start off with a quick activity. And what I want you to do for this activity is think about an apple. I know I always use apples, but they're easy to think about or to have around. So I want you to think about an apple. You have a nice, juicy, beautiful, crisp. I have a nice Gala apple here right now, and I want you to think about eating this apple. So you're going to eat it, enjoy it, have a good time eating your apple, and then think about what your apple looks like when you're finished eating it. I know that's kind of a weird question. But if you were, so let's say you're finishing eating this apple, when would you throw it away? And I'm going to throw this this infographic, this apple scale right here, and I want you to assign a number on this apple scale on what your apple looks like when you are finished eating it. So 1 being that first one at the top, which is a completely new apple uneaten, and 18 being that very last, basically the apple core at the end. And I want you to think about what your apple looks like when you are, on average, finished eating it. And like I said, I know this is kind of a weird question, but it brings us into the topic that I want to talk about today, and that is food waste. So if what your apple looks like is between like 12, 13, 14, that's on average what most Americans, what most people in the US who eat apples, that's what their apples look like when they're finished eating them. That's when they stop eating their apple. And that means that 30% of the apple that people normally eat is wasted, because you see you have all of that apple left that's still on the core that can be eaten, that is perfectly edible. And in the United States, nearly almost 30 to 40% of all the harvested food, not just apples, all of the food that we harvest is never eaten, and it goes to waste. And although, we might not eat it, something has to happen to it, and a lot of times that thing that happens to it is not always the best outcome for ourselves, for animals, or for the planet in general. And so, like I said, what I wanted to talk about today is why food waste, first of all, is a problem. Why does it matter? What happens to our food when we don't eat it? Because like I told you, a lot of our food does not get eaten, unfortunately. And then I'm just going to share some tips and tricks with you guys that you and I and everyone else can do to prevent, to minimize the food that we waste. So we're first going to talk about what happens to our food that we don't eat and why it's a problem, what is happening to it. So most of trash, just normal trash that you throw in the trash can, most of that is non-biodegradable waste, which means that all this trash can't get broken down by natural organisms and returned back to the earth. So examples of this are things like plastics or glass. So those are things that you can't throw outside, and they're not going to decompose back into the earth. On the other hand, most of our food that we don't eat, such as an apple core, that is biodegradable, and that can, using different organisms, all the nutrients from the apple core can go back to the earth to grow more apples. But unfortunately, most of the food that we don't eat gets mixed in with the other type of trash that we have, the non-biodegradable trash. So, when you throw your apple core in the trash can along with plastic water bottle or other just regular trash, it gets sent to the landfill along with everything else. So it's not separated from other non-biodegradable trash, and it gets sent to the landfills. So even though it's in the landfill, of course, your food is still going to break down over time, just as, if you left an orange or, some vegetable sitting outside for a while, it's going to break down still. And so that does happen to the food in our landfills. But the problem is that when this food does decompose in a landfill, it's buried underneath, hundreds of tons of other trash, and that means that it's almost like suffocating. It can't get any oxygen, and so it's decomposing without any oxygen. And when this happens, it generates a gas called methane. And you guys might have heard of this before, but methane is a greenhouse gas that actually is a really big contributor to things like climate change and global warming. So it's not something that we want. And that's the problem with when we throw our food away that either could be eaten or that could be composted to go back into the earth is that it generates a lot of these greenhouse gases when it gets sent to the landfills. So that's one problem, is that it's bad for our environment with our wasting our food and throwing our food away. But another problem is that discarding our food is, it's also just throwing away money, basically. So farmers, they miss out on a lot of profits when their fields go unharvested, or when they have to harvest all this food and then it doesn't get eaten anymore. And so both the consumer and the supplier are losing out on a lot of money in this case. Now that we've talked about why throwing a lot of our food away is not so good for us and for other people and animals and the planet, I want to just very briefly go over ways that we can reduce our food waste. And first of all, I think the most self-explanatory is to eat all of your food. So it seems kind of silly, but I have this really short video that shows you how eating something as simple as an apple, going back to that activity at the beginning that we did, how something as simple as the way you eat your apple can help to reduce food waste. Another way to help reduce the amount of food that we're throwing away is to do something such as challenge your family to see who can come up with the tastiest or the most creative way to use up leftover food that you've eaten. Or, if you have extra food that you're not going to eat, maybe share it with a friend. I think one of the most important things to do is make sure that you're only taking the amount of food that you can eat. You can always go back and get more food. Of course, we're always told this, but sometimes our eyes are bigger than our mouths. So we want to make sure that we're only going to grab as much food as we know we can eat, and if we want more, we can always go back for more food. Finally, something that my family likes to do is something called composting. And you might have heard of composting before, but you might not know what it means. And composting means that we're using special organisms. In many cases, it's special worms that can decompose our food scraps and turn them into a nutrient-rich material that can be used to go back into the soil and help almost like fertilize the soil. I know these seem like, very trivial things, but it is small actions that we take right now, such as, composting our food or making sure to eat all of our apple, that can build up over time to become big actions. So I hope you guys found this helpful. I hope it makes you think twice about throwing your food away, and maybe trying to implement different actions that you can take to help reduce the amount of food that you're wasting. So I hope you all have a wonderful Wednesday and a great rest of the week.